First of all praises due to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in the name of Jesus Christ. It is through him that I am being sent with this truth as a chance for redemption and grace for all. Okay, today we're going to get into this Democratic Handbook. In the late 1890s, 1898 to be specific, this demonic Democratic Party began to line all their ducks in a row. They began to produce literature with their plan for white supremacy in the coming century. All throughout the 1800s, they were setting up strategic points in order to allow this coming of their evil empire, which was placed upon the heads of the Afro-Americans, the indigenous people of North America, the children of God. Today we're just going to go through a couple of bylines of this handbook in order so we can get an accurate picture of the mind state and the demonic abilities that this party has in disenfranchising God's children. Let's get to it. You have a chance to see a couple more of those pictures. I placed the pictures here just to set the stage for the information I'm presenting, and they're accurate to the time period, where you can know the mind state of both sides, the Afro-Americans and the foreign invaders. Let's go. The Democratic Handbook. Now, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but it can be found at docsouth.unc.edu, produced by the North Carolinian government. We're going to start right here. To rule over white men. It is no fault of the Negro that he is here. He is not to be punished for being here. Now keep in mind, this is double talk. They pretend to be an alliance and on our side, but actually their plan is to infiltrate, divide, and destroy, similar to the French and Indian War. But this is a white man's country. Let me start this over. It is no fault of the Negro that he is here, and he is not to be punished for being here. But this is a white man's country, and white men must control and govern it. I can really stop right now, right there. This same mind state and ideology is being perpetrated right now today in 2022. This handbook was written in 1898, 2 years before the 1900s. So how much change do you think occurred between, let's say, 1898 and 1970? That is a short span in the big scheme of things. And these are indeed still the plans and ideology of the Democratic parties that we find ourselves under the rule of today. But let's get to it. One more time. It is no fault of the Negro that he is here. He is not to be punished for being here. But this is a white man's country, and white men must control and govern it. They must govern it not only because they are white men, but because they can do it better than the Negro. Shame. The Negro has, whenever tried, demonstrated his unfitness and inability to rule. It is better for the Negro, as well as for the white man, that the white man should make and administer the laws. It is a mercy to the Negro himself to save him from his whole ruin. It has been in the past and is today the special mission of the Democratic Party to rescue the white people of the East from the curse of the Negro. Domination. The curse of Negro domination. There it is, folks. But we shall proceed. But say the white Republicans and populist leaders who have been profiting by the Negro vote, there is no danger for Negro domination in North Carolina. At present, we admit there is no danger of Negro domination throughout the entire state. Stay tuned. Just hold on, it's coming. For notwithstanding that in a state election, the Negro cast about 120,000 votes, and the white Republican, about 30,000 votes. The Republican Party does not dare to put a Negro on their state ticket because they know the white Republicans of the West would not vote the ticket. The Republican leaders rely on the white Republicans of the West to vote to put the Negro over the white men and women of the East, but not over themselves. 4 out of every 5 of the votes cast for a Republican state ticket are cast by the Negro. Yet, the leaders do not dare to put a Negro on the state ticket for the white man of the West to vote for. Senator Pritchard appoints and consents to the appointment of Negro postmasters in the East. Okay. During and shortly after the Lincoln administration, rules were set, laws were laid, covenants were formed and signed, which allowed for these foreign invaders to have an equal opportunity for liberty and justice in this land. But, as we all know, they assassinated Father Abraham. They killed him. As the Bible speaks about Abraham, it says Abraham was the father of many nations. Many nations came to this land, and he gave them a fair opportunity to do the right thing. But instead, they assassinated him. However, it took a couple of decades for this Democratic Party to completely remove the rule and will of the Afro-Americans from their homeland. So what we're about to read next is about a town called Wilmington, North Carolina. And in 1898, a coup was perpetrated by white supremacists who took over this town, which was mainly ruled by Afro-Americans. And this town was an example of the mind state of this democratic, demonic handbook that we're reading right now. Let's get to it. See the way this go, folks? God just put the information into my head, so I pause a little bit and I look and I look. I'm just listening to what he tell me, and this is what I'm being told to present. So when I fumble a little bit, just work with me, because it's all happening fast. It's all happening in real time. Most of this information, I just Google and find things that I can match to what God is telling me to present to the people. But most of the time, I haven't even previewed this information before I begin the show. So when I'm reading it, I'm learning at the same time as I'm presenting it. And like I said, it happens fast, folks, but I'm going to get better at it. Okay, let's go down here. Let's go ahead and go straight to Wilmington. So, Wilmington and New Bern. No town was too important to be turned over to the Negroes by the fusionists. The charters of Wilmington and New Bern were amended, and the people were allowed to elect only one alderman for each ward, while the governor was given the power to appoint another alderman for each ward. The effect was to turn those people over to the tender mercies of Dan Russell. And now, when you go to Wilmington and New Bern, you see Negro policemen and Negro officers as thick as blackbirds. So, although it speaks about Wilmington, North Carolina, what is actually laying out is the plan to destroy any remaining Negro communities that stand up against the authority of this white supremacist, demonic, democratic mind state. In order to accomplish these purposes, attention is called to the fact that the governor of the state is given the power to appoint an alderman for each and every ward in these two cities. This is a direct blow at the theory of self-government, and it was done by populists and Republicans in the fusion legislature in the interest of the Negro. Once again, there goes their double talk. Pay attention. While loudly proclaiming themselves in favor of government by the people and boasting of their purpose to maintain self-government in North Carolina, why are not the people of Wilmington and New Bern competent to elect their aldermen? And why should Dan Russell be made ruler over people of those cities if he cannot appoint aldermen? Okay, to give y'all a better, clearer view, let's see if I can pull up a little bit of something on Wilmington. Jump over here on the tube. Let's see. Wilmington. Now we'll just go with this first one right here. Little film for y'all.
What is a woman? Can you...
Hold on, let me get my sound together. Turn this thing down. Bear with me. All in real time.
Can you tell me that? Well, you're at the Women's March. You must have some idea. Please, if one person could tell me what a woman...
For a long time, if you went to the library in Wilmington, North Carolina, there was one thing you weren't allowed to research.
We were refused. We were rejected by the librarian.
When I asked about or inquired about 1898, they wanted to know why.
I was told that, yes, they had something, but they kept it under lock and key.
The story of Wilmington in 1898 still isn't widely known.
What happened here on what's now just this empty patch of grass would radically change racial politics in North Carolina.
This is the story of an American election.
But keep in mind, all of this occurred around the same time as this Democratic Handbook being presented to the white supremacists as the ultimate goal and plans for the late 1800s, coming into the early 1900s.
But also of something we don't usually find in American history: the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government.
Don't let the wording fool you. Democratically, they mean just voting.
In the late 1800s, Wilmington, North Carolina was the state's largest city. It had a majority black population, and historians today describe it as a rarity in the post-Civil War.
This is just one example of how we already had flourishing communities. Despite the rumors and historical stories told about slavery, in fact, we were flourishing. We fell from grace when we lost sight of the Lord, the Most High, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let's go.
Or American South.
Wilmington
prior to November 1898 was what the New South could be at the cusp of the 20th century.
There was an unusual degree of black prosperity.
In Wilmington, there were successful black entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, but also black elected officials. And for a time, that was true throughout the state. Take a look at the politicians.
It was basically one of the last standing black utopias. Wilmington held on as long as they could, but eventually the white supremacists came through and conquered and destroyed.
On this poster of the 1889 North Carolina House of Representatives. Here at the bottom are black Republican representatives, some from Wilmington. North Carolina also sent 4 black Republicans to the U.S. Congress between 1875 and 1899. The Democratic and Republican parties of 1898 in many ways occupied opposite parts of the political spectrum than they do today.
Most African Americans were voting for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was white voters almost exclusively. White supremacy was the central focus of the platform for the Democratic Party.
Republicans in North Carolina were successful in part because of a third party called the Populist Party, made up of mostly white farmers fed up with the tough economic times. North Carolina populists joined up with Republicans to form what they...
And once again, these populists presented themselves as the party of the people, but they were actually fusionists, undercover Democratic agents sent in to destroy the Republican Reconstruction movement started by Father Abraham.
They called the Fusion Party. And in the elections of 1894 and 1896, the Fusion Party defeated the Democrats in sweeping victories statewide. That meant North Carolina now had a government that shared power between black and white politicians, including a newly elected Republican governor. Together, they moved towards reforms that would favor black Americans and working-class whites.
This was something that the Democratic Party folks were simply not going to accept.
A multiracial government wasn't just a disappointment for Democrats. It was more like a humiliation. They needed a plan to take back control of the state in the next election. So party leaders like Furnifold Simmons, future U.S. Senator, Charles Aycock, future North Carolina governor, and this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, came up with one: to beat the Fusion Party by luring white populist voters away from their alliance with black voters.
If you look carefully, they just illustrated perfectly my viewpoint and what God wants the people to know. It was all a heist. It was all a trick to lure the Afro-Americans into turning against the will of the Father. The devil is very crafty and very tricky.
Wilmington, with a large black population and a local fusion government in power, would be a focus of their campaign. The state Democratic Party Handbook for a large black population and future U.S. Senator, Charles Aycock, future North Carolina governor, and this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, came up with one: to beat the Fusion Party by luring white populist voters away from their alliance with black voters. Wilmington, with a large black population and a local fusion government in power, would be a focus of their campaign. The state Democratic Party Handbook for 1898 laid out their goal: consolidate the white vote by stoking white anger and resentment. It said, "This is a white man's country, and white men must control and govern it."
God is great.
Do you love boating? Well, Freedom Boat Club makes boating easier than ever.
I'm just watching this video with y'all. This is the first time I've seen any of this. Watch how God works.
Their most effective tool was the media. One of North Carolina's biggest newspapers was a Democratic Party mouthpiece. It ran racist political cartoons throughout 1898.
Not everybody was literate in 1898, but to see a political cartoon of the type that ran, you may not be able to read it, but you know exactly what it means.
Many of the cartoons were centered on the threat of Negro rule, even though the fusion government was mostly white. They also played up another fear.
Black men threatening white women became a theme. White men need to do all that they can to protect white womanhood.
Now fast forward to 2022, every night when you turn on the evening news, what do you see? You see black men committing crime, black men threatening white supremacy. And what this does is ideologically subvert the public into believing that black men are worthless. Black men are nothing but criminals. Black men are a threat to civil society. When in reality, this is our land. This is our birthright. They're the foreign invaders. They are the true threat. Let's go.
This was all part of North Carolina Democratic strategy, but it echoed the national racist rhetoric of the time. In one speech that Democrats printed in Wilmington paper, a prominent Georgia writer named Rebecca Felton said,
"If it takes lynching a black man a day to protect..."
Let me start running this back a little bit because I'm talking over it. And these are important points that God wants the people to know. This is the truth that he wants to present to people to give them an opportunity to turn from their wicked ways and come back home to God before the coming of the Lord. Because once he come, you know, it's going to get real. Destruction.
In one speech that Democrats printed in Wilmington paper, a prominent Georgia writer named Rebecca Felton said,
"If it takes lynching a black man a day to protect white womanhood, I say lynch."
Her speech prompted a Wilmington black man named Alex Manley, owner of the Black-run Daily Record newspaper, to respond with a column. He made a simple observation that, at the time, was shocking.
That white women who had liaisons with black men did so voluntarily and enthusiastically.
Manley wrote, "Every Negro lynched is called a big burly black brute, when in fact many were sufficiently attractive for white girls to fall in love with them."
Manley pretty much said, in a nutshell, sometimes white women choose to be with black men.
Manley's editorial became another tool for Democrats. Newspapers reprinted it, called it a horrid slander, and ran comments about it on a daily basis. It was just a few months before the election, and white voters were angry.
By the time the election rolls around on November 8th, black voters, Republican voters, had been thoroughly intimidated here.
By all accounts, the elections of 1898 were a sham. The Democratic Party had a paramilitary group called the Red Shirts. They attacked and blocked black residents from voting. At a rally just before the election, Alfred Moore Waddell provoked the crowds. He said,
"Now, if you've been keeping up with the Focus Daily Show, we've already spoke about the mindset and how these events came into fruition. Right now, this is kind of summing up the previous shows. We're about to go into the next century, into the 1900s, where an all-out Holocaust and genocide will be perpetrated against the Afro-Americans. God sees it. He knows. This is our opportunity to come back home, people, before this destruction ensues.
Negro office holding ought at once and forever be brought to an end, even if we have to choke the provoked the crowds. He said, "Negro office holding ought at once and forever be brought to an end, even if we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear River with carcasses." The votes were counted, and the Democrats won.
Democratic candidates won every seat they had a candidate up for election in.
But some local fusionist politicians...
Just a slight example of media propaganda. We'll be getting more into that later.
...remained in power because their seats hadn't been up for re-election, like the white Republican mayor and the Board of Aldermen. And of course, the election did nothing to undo the economic power black folks held in the city. The Democrats had won the election, but their goal of total white supremacist control remained out of reach.
And so they engineered what was essentially a coup d'etat.
The day after the election, at a gathering for white men in Wilmington, the Democrats unveiled a document called the White Declaration of Independence. It contained an ultimatum. Cynthia Brown, whose descendants were in Wilmington back in 1898, is a historian at her church where there's a preserved copy of the declaration from the next day's newspaper.
We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin.
They would strip black men of voting rights. They would give white men a large part of the employment heretofore given to black men. And as for Alex Manly, we demand that he leave this city forever within 24 hours. The next morning, hundreds of white men marched to the offices of the Daily Record. Manly was gone. He had fled to save his own life. They set the Daily Record building on fire.
One simple but brilliant trick to cool your home in 90 seconds.
This is where it once stood.
Once the white leadership destroyed Alex Manly's printing press, they destroyed one way in which the African American community in Wilmington could organize itself and keep itself informed.
At one point, the Afro-Americans had their own independent source of information. But as you can see, once this demonic Democratic Party took power, if it wasn't company subscribed, the East Indian Company, the Virginia Company, the United States Company, the Royal Charter, whichever verbiage you want to use, if it wasn't company described, it had to be eliminated.
At City Hall, the mayor and board of aldermen were forced out.
There's 200 armed men in City Hall at the time. They didn't do it of their own free will. And as they resigned, a new member selected by the Democratic Party was voted into office.
Waddell, who once threatened to fill the Cape Fear River with black bodies, was the new mayor of Wilmington. Meanwhile, the mob had grown to about 2,000 men, and the violence spilled into the streets. In these photos, X's mark where the first black residents were killed.
The stories are that they were dumped into the river, and there are varying stories about how many people were killed.
I see 40 to 60 clearly as fatalities.
Don't worry, folks.
as a
God
result
got
of the
our
violence,
back.
But
we have to come home.
I think it was higher.
Many black residents hid for days in the swamps and the wooded cemeteries in the city, including Cynthia's great-grandmother.
You just put this information
and thousands
into my brain,
of other residents fled Wilmington, never to return. Shortly afterward, Democrats printed booklets celebrating a glorious victory, and in the newspapers depicted black residents as the instigators.
This image is a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened during 1898. You know, what you see is African American men with guns, not white men with machine guns.
The city never regained its black majority population. Jim Crow laws like literacy tests and poll taxes that prevented black people from voting were immediately enacted, and Wilmington's spirit of black...
All the Jim Crow laws were an effort to put an end to the Reconstruction legislature introduced by Abraham Lincoln.
Black opportunity was crushed. Black political representation in the state was over. It would be 90 years until North Carolina elected its next black Congress member.
Well into the 1990s, like I was saying, all of this occurred at the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And this Democratic Handbook is official, as they're pointing out. Well into the 1990s, it was still in effect.
Wilmington did a really great job of covering up a very dark past for a very long time.
Over the years, the textbooks on North Carolina's history have struggled to accurately describe what happened in 1898. This one from 1933 says the situation was unfortunate for both races. And this one from 1978 doesn't have that much more detail. But they both praise Charles Aycock, a politician who helped perpetrate the riot. They say he had a keen mind and a kind heart, and that, in fact, he was one of the best friends that the colored people had in the state. It's a legacy that North Carolina has yet to fully undo. The names of the perpetrators are on Wilmington's school buildings and city parks. But the legacy is also bigger than those names. Turn on the news, and the state's long history of political suppression echoes.
We turn to a strict new voter ID law in North Carolina. Racial gerrymandering and a push for new voting maps.
The court says the Republican-led legislature redrew congressional districts along racial lines, violating the Constitution.
There's a tremendous amount of intimidation that is still felt by the black community.
It doesn't have to be mass mayhem and violence in the streets.
The strategy shifts towards designing state laws in such a way that you could exclude blacks from voter participation.
The subliminal pursuit of continuing the white Declaration of Independence.
And if you don't see it for what it really is, it can happen all over again.
Well, that's it for today, folks. A view into the Democratic, demonic mind state. But until next time, Focus Daily. We out.